Oh, road cases. Okay, we've all seen concerts and seen those cool looking rolling boxes that they're pushing across the stage and from the 18 wheelers. And you say, man, where in the world do they get those? I used to call them tour cases when I was a little kid. I was all about production. I loved rock bands. I was a fan of all that stuff and I wanted to learn about it. But that's what I called them. I said, man, those tour cases are so cool. It's those black and silver boxes that have special lids and, compartments for everything they need to put on the concert. Oh, don't let that. Well, we are back again for another video and another awesome DIY. So I got a call from the School of Rock, some good friends of mine that work out there, and they said, hey, we're getting a brand new mixer board. We need you to build us a road case.
I got the new Allen and Heath QU32 to use here at the School of Rock. We needed a hard case to carry it around in for our gigs. Pretty big size. Mike here builds road cases, so called up to see what he could do for us.
Now, road cases are not the easiest thing to build. I mean, sure, you could throw something together, put some aluminum edging on it, throw some wheels, whatever. But when you're really trying to be precise and you're trying to get all that metal to fit on there just right, it can be a little tricky. So watch closely. Now, the basic idea here for building a case that's going to house a large mixing console, I like for it to be easy to set up, easy to tear down, but still safe to transport. So what I'm thinking is we're going to do a flip-up style case. I did one for my Midas M32 quite a while back, and I never really finished it out. I built it to the point where it was usable. It looked fine for me. It was functional, did the job. What we want to do is build something basically like a cradle that's going to hold on to the mixer board itself. It's going to have some padding in it, and it's also going to secure it down so that no matter what direction you turn it, the mixer board is not going to fall out. Now, that cradle that we're talking about is going to mount inside of the case, and it's going to have a hinge system that allows it to flip up when you open the front doors and you pull off the lid. I'm also going to install some small gas struts to assist with the lifting, so you're not lifting all the weight of that mixer and taking more of a chance of the case trying to topple backwards when you're pulling it up. So getting right into it, we're going to start with measuring out the mixing console and try to figure out how the sides are going to look. So what I've done here is I've laid out one of the sides of the cradle that's going to hold the mixer in. It's the part that's going to flip. And what I basically did was measured the height of the front of the mixer, or the end of it, and then when you get to the back, it's about that high. And what I've done is allowed extra, because at the top there's going to be a brace that goes across to lock the mixer in so it doesn't fall out. And then also I might put like an angle piece of wood or steel that holds a padding around the whole edge. So you'll see that more as it comes together, but I basically laid out the side and we're getting ready to cut that. And it's the length of what the side of this is, the platform that the mixer is going to sit on. So it basically, what we've made here is a side, kind of like on the Midas, made the side here, and then there's a platform it sits on when it flips, and that's what this platform is. So basically this has to be the same as one of the sides, and it's going to go on. And you can see the way the Allen and Heath board is shaped. That's the 2-inch area, and then it's about 9 over here, and I'll have the board that goes across to lock it in. So that's what we're doing. So here's a rough cut of a side, and I think it's about what I want for starting out. I'll probably build the cradle, and then I'm gonna end up, you know, either cutting it down a little bit or, you know, deciding what to do as far as holding the mixer in. Like I was saying in the other one, there's most likely gonna be a bar that goes across here, like something that'll hold it in there nice and tight. Usually at the bottom, I make it to where it kind of curls around so that it's held in when the mixer is sitting down in the case, so it sits on it nicely. And then I also, you know, need it to be held in from flopping out as well, and that's what the bar up here would do. When it's set up, it just sets normally like on the platform. So back here it'll have a little cut, like a little cable guide, probably just like I did for the Midas case over here. Of course, it's gonna be nicer. That was my first one, but the way that it sits in here is awesome. It's just, it's got good padding, and it has padding up here. And I made it to where the wood curves around to follow that edge, so it fits in there nice and tight. I'm gonna do something similar. Now, starting with the sides, the cradle's fairly simple to get together. You're going to get about the shape that you want, build the bottom, and then we get to the parts that secure it in. There's going to be like a lock bar at the top and then one at the bottom. Now, when it comes to things like this, okay, woodworking, sure, that's fine. We can build it out of wood. But you want to come up with some way that's going to allow us to disassemble and reassemble if we wanted to. Say that they decided they're going to use this mixer out of the case and they're going to put it somewhere, but then a month later they want to secure it into the case. So we need something that's going to allow us to take it apart and put it back together without wearing out screw holes and, you know, things like that. My choice is metal inserts. Anytime I'm using wood to build something, but say I've got to attach, like, remember the piano shell build if you watched it, I was attaching the legs to the piano shell with threaded inserts that go underneath. And that allows me to put those legs on with bolts and take them off time and again and time and again. And if you remember the piano shell DIY that I did, I think I've used that shell now for probably somewhere around 100 gigs, and those legs still fit tight every single time. So metal inserts are definitely the way to go. That's what we're going to use on these locking bars that hold the mixer board in. You'll see how we install them. Typically, you just got to drill some holes that are a little big. The inserts are going to turn in with an Allen wrench or sometimes a big flathead screwdriver. It just depends on which ones that you bought. But once those inserts are secured in the wood, they're ready to receive a bolt or whatever kind of screw that fits the proper thread. Also, you want to use some wood glue when you put those things in to make sure that they get nice and tight once it dries. Alright, so what I've got going on here is I'm building the front piece that kind of holds the mixer in tight. So I use this 3/4 inch slat. I think it's like a, well, kind of probably a 1x2 or whatever. Use that, and then I've got this rounded angle. And what I did was, besides just gluing and clamping, clean this up a bit, you want to use one of these 3/32 pilot drilling bits, and it has like the countersinking setup on it, because I like to use some screws but not put them in so tight. I just like the screw to go in tight enough to clamp it and get the glue to squeeze out a bit. But you don't want, these are actually taper head screws. You don't want the screw protruding out, because when this rounded part goes here to secure the board down, and also there's gonna be the rubber padding in here too. So it's really not gonna be exposed to the screw. I just don't want any chance of, like, you know, if the board really cushions down on that rubber, I don't want it to have a chance of the screw head kind of like going through and damaging the mixer. So what I like to do is make it to where, you know, it goes nicely against it, and make it to where all these screws are countersunk really good. Now, not too far, obviously. You got to find the happy medium so it doesn't go all the way through. But you can see none of these screw heads are sticking out. So they'll be down in there. And whenever I take my rubber foam, I'll line it in here, and then the board will actually sit nice and tight up against it. And it worked on my case really well. It's the same way that I did it. What it does is it locks the bottom of the mixer in, so that when this thing is actually flipped down, you don't want that front corner like kicking out. And again, I'll probably use some kind of side brace too to lock it down, because it has this at the top. This will be the one that holds the top in. There will be some bolts that go in. But I also want it to be good and secure down at the bottom. So I go through the trouble of building this little piece, and it ends up working out pretty good. So the threaded inserts are a great thing. What I do is put a little bit of wood glue in them. I'll actually show you as I do this. Let's see. So I like to put a little bit of wood glue in these little threads, or whatever you want to call them. And should actually go more towards the bottom, because it'll come up as it's going in. So the bottom is the skinnier side. You can tell it's tapered a little bit. So what happens is, as you're spinning this thing in, the glue will make its way down in the hole, and it tightens up the wood really nice. And these are super handy, because anytime that you're gonna put something together and take it apart, even if it isn't, you know, done that often, just every now and then, going into wood, you know, I like to use bolts, and these allow you to use bolts. It's turned in with an Allen wrench. You'll see I'll do it. It's really cool. So you get it kind of started just like this. You can feel the little thread start to grab. In some ways it will still try to go in crooked, even though it's going to follow the hole. Well, that's great. Let me go grab that. Yeah, these can go in a little bit crooked if you're not careful. I get them started, and then I'll take the Allen wrench and try to adjust it a little bit before I put it in all the way. So let's get this started. Sometimes it takes a little bit, especially when you've got glue and you're trying to get it in there before, you know, before it runs everywhere. Okay, so you can see, if you look at it from the side, you want to kind of make sure that, you know, it looks like this one's going to go in fairly straight. Not sure if the camera angle's showing it right, but I think I'm happy enough with this one where I can keep going in with it a bit and see how it goes. Sometimes you can back it out a little too to try and work the glue in there, and try to cut the thread so it doesn't really split your wood. Also, when I drill these, I'm using, I believe it's a 5/16 bit. And when you get the hole drilled to the proper depth for these inserts, I also like to go around and cone the hole out just a little bit. Because up here at the top, you want the hole to be almost as wide as those threads, not as wide as just the little barrel. And even though it means the threads aren't going to catch as much on top, it keeps the wood from splitting out as bad, and the glue is still going to tighten the hole up for you right there. And you'll notice there's still plenty of grab throughout the rest of the hole. It's just that little area at the top, I kind of wallow it out enough to where the wood doesn't split. When you get it in there, kind of flush. You can wipe the glue off. I think that's good. A little bit more. And there you go. Now you have a threaded hole that will accept a bolt, and it should do it over and over and over again. You could take it apart and put it together however many times that you want, and that's it's a very handy way to fasten things together with wood when you know it might need to be disassembled a few times here and there. All right, so now I've got the bottom brace installed. Let's see, that's one of the bolts that goes in through the bottom. This one goes in, and what it is I got two in the sides, one on each side. So one on each side, and then three across the bottom to hold this brace in. And then up here on top, this is the one that keeps the mixer from kind of falling forward when the case is closed and the mixer's flipped down. I've got two bolts on each side. They're not tight, it's just kind of test fitted. Everything's test fitted because I want to put a good finish on this this little cradle part, or whatever you call it. So those bolts are in. It's a nice little strong brace up here. And then this is the bottom brace that has my curved piece. And all that'll be padded. So yeah, bolt on each side, then three underneath. And I might even put dowel pins so that when you install this board, it slides onto some wooden dowels as well, but I'm not sure yet. Maybe some metal ones. All right, so we're just about done with the part that's gonna hold the mixer in place. This is what I kind of call the cradle or the carriage or whatever. It's just, that's the part that's actually gonna flip up and down. Now that case, pay no attention, that's my own Midas M32 in there. So my case isn't finished yet, but one day it will be. Now I'm sure you're gonna think this part's really fun. The money spending part, ordering all the hardware. I normally use a site called reliablehardware.com, and I also go on eBay to find a few other specific things that I want. Whether it's certain wheels or maybe the pin L-com handles, I do like those because they've proven to be very strong over time. As a matter of fact, pin L-com makes really professional hardware for road cases and things like that, other music equipment. And if you need to know the spelling on that, P-E-N-N E-L-C-O-M. So that's a brand that I typically like to find when I'm shopping for road case hardware. Otherwise, Reliable Hardware carries a lot of good stuff, and usually the shipping is pretty quick to get it to me as well. So one of the first things that you notice when you see a road case is it's got all that nice aluminum edging going up and down the the horizontals, the verticals, and sides and stuff like that. And what I get is this, I want to say it's 1.25 inches, but it's pre-punched, so I don't have to go through and drill all these holes. That's kind of nice. Definitely don't like having it, I mean, more drilling, it takes forever. So here's the edging that you would use. It looks really nice. So the edging is going to meet at the corners. You're going to need 8 of those if you're doing a typical rectangular prism or cubic type box. So the corners are going to go on just like that. And also you can have these cut at Reliable Hardware when you order it. They can do like 3 pieces that are 4 feet long or 4 pieces that are 3 feet long, because it comes in a 12-foot stick. So you're buying it by the 12-foot stick. And there's a few options on how you can have it cut for shipping. The next one is the tongue and groove aluminum. And this is what's gonna go around the openings. So when you open a case or when you pull the lid off, this is that tongue and groove that you see. I'm gonna bring it a little closer to the camera, because what I want you to notice when you're ordering it, it's a little confusing at first because this stuff is actually a break apart. So, and it doesn't take that much force when you cut the piece you need. You can break these two apart and it ends up like this. This is the tongue side. See, it's just like that. So I have a piece here that's already been broken apart, and then it's gonna end up mating with this one. Okay, this will be the part you put on the case, and then you also put this part on the case, but they'll face each other instead of away like this. And then they close just like that. So that's your tongue and groove. Usually that's gonna be cut at 45s so that when your corners go together, they fit really nice. Definitely take your time measuring that stuff out and try to get it as good as you can. Now, another thing that I use, I can get this at your big box, home improvement stores. It's just like piano hinge. And I'm gonna use that for the cabinet doors on this case, because since the mixer flips up and down, I want the doors to open up a little bit wider and have a little bit more space. And I'm gonna use piano hinges on the sides. Next one is your recessed latches. Now, these are the medium-sized recessed latch, but you can get them in a small or a large, and you can even get them in really small sizes, but I believe the standard road case size is kind of like the smaller, the medium, and then the large, which I don't typically need them that big. This medium size always works pretty well for what I'm doing. Now, let's get into a little bit of where the corners meet up. Now, let's say you put on some edging. I'm gonna bring this over to the camera. So let's say we put on a piece of edging. It's on the corner, right? And again, if this is going also on your piece of plywood, this is gonna be cut at a 45 going in. So it's a little tricky to cut that. Get you one of those little yellow boxes that has like the 45-degree angle, and you can get that at your tool store also. So when this sits on here, and then you've got the other piece for the other side that's gonna sit over here. What you wanna do is finish this off with something nice. And what I do is I get these 6-hole clamps from Reliable Hardware, and it just happens to fit on this really nice. And you can see the little triangle that kind of goes in, and then when you've got this one on here, let's see, it's kind of hard to hold it. See that? The triangle kind of lines up. That's how you do a corner. So you want to get probably 8 of these 6-hole clamps, unless you're doing more extrusion and more openings. Just do your calculations. All right, so that's most of the hardware. Now, when I fasten it on, some of it comes with screws. Screws are great for temporarily fitting everything and making sure that that's kind of where you want it to go and that things are gonna work right. But when you get ready to permanently install, I'm a big fan of using some pop rivets. These are 3/16, and those tend to work pretty well with the holes that are drilled in the hardware. So let's bring this over a bit. See that? So definitely go with some rivets. If you're gonna be doing a lot of rivet popping, you probably don't wanna use this thing. It'll get you by, but I feel like they get wore out really fast, or certain tip sizes just don't take very well. It's like sometimes I'm sitting there doing this and doing this to pop one rivet, and it's not barely catching the pin, which gets really, really frustrating. So instead, I think I spent probably 90 or 100 bucks on this pneumatic rivet gun. I got it at Harbor Freight. I don't think it was their cheapest one, and it may not have been the most expensive, or it might have been, I can't really remember. But this is worth every bit of it, especially if you're doing a road case. There's probably a couple hundred rivets between the handles, the latches, the edging and everything, the corners. I mean, look, you got 6 right there on one corner, and you're gonna do 8 corners. On a latch, you've got, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You've got 10 on a latch. I'm gonna do 6 latches on this case, so that's 60 more. Not even got to the handles yet, or the aluminum edging, which you can see this one's pre-punched, has a ton of holes. So definitely worth it to grab a pop rivet gun, a pneumatic one. I love this one, it's been great to me. If you want the item number on it, it's 98898. So I do recommend that one. It hasn't given me any problems. So that pretty much covers the hardware that we're gonna use. When it comes to the finishing laminate on the outside of the case, I order the 4x8 foot sheet of ABS laminate, and it also can be ordered at reliablehardware.com. And you just put this on with a good spray adhesive. You're typically gonna spray the back of the laminate and the wood surface. And when you cut your piece already, you get ready to put them together, you need to make sure you line it up just right, because you're probably not gonna get a second chance at that. It's gonna be really hard to remove that laminate without bending it or doing some kind of damage to it while you're trying to pull it off because the adhesive's so strong. And then last but not least, the little J roller. This thing, you'll use it to press the adhesive together. So once you've got the laminate on, you can just kind of roll it and it should get the adhesive to tack together really nice. I love how they stack all these together. You know, and of course the parts like in the packages or whatever. So it's like all stacked and wrapped up together. And then they roll up that big ass sheet of ABS plastic and they ship it all in this little square box. I always thought that was creative of them. I mean, how else would you really do it? But it's like they fit a lot of stuff in there and there was still room left. Kind of funny. All right, let's get back to it and keep this thing going. So we've pretty much got the cradle built for the mixing console. Now that that's done, we can get to the main box part of the case. Now, there's a few ways to do this. Sometimes you could build the lid separately from the box, but in this particular situation, when I want all of the tongue and groove to fit really nice and it's gonna go on there, you know, it's gotta line up just right, I actually like to build the box as a whole, and then I'm gonna end up cutting the part off, which becomes the lid. So I know that those edges are gonna line up just right when I get ready to put them back together as a case. I've got most of my pieces cut to put the outer shell of the case together. We've got the sides, and that's one of the big, probably the front or the back, and then vice versa, the other front or back piece. And then I've got a little bit left over there to make the top. Now, this is the ABS laminate that goes on the outside of a road case, and you can see it's about, I don't know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch thick, maybe a little less. So what I'm gonna do, as far as I know, you put this on the bottom because you don't want rain, or you know, if rain or water or moisture ever to get on the case, you don't want it to catch in there. So put this part on going up. Now what happens is when it goes on, the plywood I got, it fits pretty much just right, like this. So like, you know, the laminate would be on, this would be the outside of the road case. The problem is, if you can tell, this fits perfectly on this piece of plywood right now. So it's gonna end up being a little bit too tight once you get the laminate put on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure out where the box is gonna be separated. So if this piece were standing up, you're gonna have the top, that's gonna be like the lid of the case, and then this is like the bottom section. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing a center line where it's, I know it's squiggly because the wood grain is so rough. The center line is where I would actually cut the top separately, and then I've got two other lines drawn to where it's gonna be, that's where my routing is gonna stop. So I'm gonna route this whole channel out just deep enough to where it's gonna make up for the thickness of that laminate. So what's actually gonna end up happening is when this goes on, the outside here is gonna be going over the laminate, and then this part is gonna be inset a little bit on the inside of the case. So it's just a small, you know, little small detail, but I figured I'd go ahead and route it early so I don't have to try and do it. I don't have to try and get it straight after it's cut and all that. I'm gonna route it first, and then I'm gonna make the cut right in the center of the routing. So both pieces will be ready to go over the laminate. Now, just in case you didn't catch exactly what's going on here, I'm keeping the boards together because I'm not cutting the lid off until the whole box is put together. But I need that routing to be done somewhere in between there. That way when we cut the lid separate from the other box, there's gonna be a thinner area of the plywood at the bottom of the lid and at the top of the main case. So when we put the tongue and groove aluminum on there, they'll fit just right even after the black laminate plastic has been put on the outside. So I've got the bottom platform all clamped together. So I actually put 2 different pieces, and I do the grain, the orientation is the opposite ways so that it's really nice and strong on the bottom.
Now typically putting together something like this main box, or just about any woodwork that I do, I'm going to put wood glue at pretty much all the joints and seams. Wood glue is always a good idea because you just really can't go wrong with it. It's super strong and you can put it just about anywhere. Otherwise, I'm using a series of brad nails from my air nailer. It's a pretty small one, and screws where I can get away with it depending on the thickness of the wood.
Now you're going to want to really take some time thinking about when you order your metal edging, because you know you want to make sure, for one thing, that you order enough, but it's expensive. I mean, I feel like it is. So you also don't want to have waste, or you know, don't want to have that much waste. Now what I had done was I ordered one 12-foot stick. I think they come in 12-foot sticks, but you have to have it cut as either like 3 4-foot pieces or 4 3-foot pieces, and I think there's another variation you can do, but I had one of them cut in 4 3-foot pieces, because what I thought I was going to end up doing was using the 3-foot pieces for the vertical, and then I was going to end up with this annoying couple inches of waste, which, you know, that's going to happen. But here's what I just figured out. Make sure that you lay all this stuff up. And what I had also done was I ordered 2 of the sticks. So I have 6 pieces that are cut at 4 feet long, because I ordered 2 more for them to cut in 4 8 12. So 3 4-foot pieces per 12-foot stick is what you end up getting. But what I just realized is that I'm only going to need 4 of these now. And this is great because I can use 2 of these 4-foot sections for another case. But what's going to happen is I realized instead of using one of those 3-foot pieces for a vertical, I can use it here, and I'm gonna end up, I don't know, either notching it or whatever. Either way, I could probably end up putting it under the caster wheel, and then I'll put some little spacers to shim that. That way I don't have to cut the aluminum and mess with the strength. You know, I don't wanna like notch it out, because this has a lot of really good strength for keeping the case together. But what I realized is this fits really nicely with that. You know, you got to have a little bit of a, you know, an edge there. Typically I'll cut them at, you know, a 45 degree, but what happens is instead of using 3-foot for a vertical, I think I'm going to end up using it for these horizontals, and I have 4 of them, which is perfect. Now the reason why the end needs to have a little bit is because this corner, for one thing, goes over it, it's going to cover it. But the other thing is, when you put the piece on that meets up with it, you're either going to need these to kind of be cut at 45s or just a little short. And I want to say that there's not a lot of room for error. If you do a square cut and then you do a square cut on this one, there's a chance that this almost doesn't cover. Well, let's see how far it goes. If you pull this, okay, so you have a little ways to go with it. It all depends on what size edging that you ordered. I think this stuff is 1.25 inches. So basically what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end up using the 4 3-foot sections to go horizontal. So this is actually the bottom you're looking at. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use 4 of these 4-foot sections. And even though they're a lot longer, what's great about this is this piece that I cut off up here, instead of being like a couple inches of waste, it's gonna end up being the perfect size for these pieces that go on the short edges. I think, so this works out great. Basically what I'm saying is always take some time to try and fit your parts up before you just start cutting, especially when you're dealing with these materials that are kind of expensive right now. So basically, if I cut this, you know, it's not gonna be the full 33, let me see, how's this, 33 inches tall. Yeah, it's not gonna be the full 33. It's probably gonna get cut a little short because of leaving the slack on the end. And then it leaves me with probably close to 16 inches of leftover. And this piece right here is only gonna need to be about 15. So that's perfect because all I gotta do is cut down these 4 for the verticals, and I'm gonna have my pieces for the short sides. And then I get 2 more pieces that I can put on maybe my mixer case. Mine has a Midas M32 in it. And that case was never finished because I just don't finish my cases until I get time. There's another one back there you can see, slowly but surely getting finished. So the main box is done, and we're getting that lid section cut off so we can separate it from the bottom part of the case. Now at this time, you can get ready to start fitting some of your hardware on, like cutting the holes for the handles, cutting out those U shapes for the latches that are going to fasten on, and even put the casters on if it's not going to make it too much of a pain while you're trying to work on the box. Sometimes it's easier for me to have the casters on, other times it's not, because every time you do something with it, it just wants to roll away from you. So in that case, you can also set it up on this nice little body shop stand like what I use in the video. So I've got the holes for the handles cut, and what we're gonna do now is just put in a couple screws. I like to temporarily dry fit everything, kind of put it together. On these Pin-Elcom handles, the back cutout is right at a 3" by 5" slot. So, you know, it's hard to measure that sometimes because of that curve, but I cut this right about 3 by 5. And I drill the corners first so it's a little bit round. And you can see it doesn't move at all. I mean, this is the most perfect fit you could possibly get. Takes a little bit of practice to get that, but as long as you're close. The thing is when you drill for your rivets, you want to have a lot of wood for it to grab into all the way around. So we're going to go ahead and pop one of these in and kind of leave it there temporarily until we get ready to remove all the hardware for the ABS laminate to go on, that big black sheet that's over there. And I like to put the hardware on so that I kind of know what's in the way. If I'm installing something else, I like to know what kind of problems I might run into, instead of just kind of forgetting like, oh, a handle goes there. Maybe you go to install your extrusion and it's gonna hit, it just stuff like that. So I'll end up, that's why I have a line here too. It also kind of tells me that this area is off limits because we're gonna have a strip of aluminum that goes on there to hold everything together nice and tight. But also because of the way I like the doors to open really wide and give us a little extra space, the hinges go here on the side, and the cut for the hinges is gonna be somewhere in here. So you actually get some of the side that opens with the front doors. And that just shows me to kind of stay out of this area though. That's why I do a little dotted line, because I know that this is already kind of spoken for, so don't try to put anything there. So cool.
One of the things I like to do with my metal work is use the belt sander to sand the edges and maybe round the corners off, especially on these piano hinges because they're kind of thin and they can get really sharp.
So you're going to realize that when you're doing something like a road case, everything is going to fall into an order in its own way. Like you might realize that you need to figure out the exact dimension of this door, like where you're going to cut it before you can cut the length of this hinge. So that's what I had to do. I had to figure out how long the door was going to be so I could cut my hinges, because I want to put the hinge on before I cut the center of the door. It's like, you know, you'll try to do certain things, you know, you say, oh, I want to go ahead and cut the doors off, but I didn't want to do that because I want to put the hinge on before I completely separate it, so I know that it's going right back on where it came from and that this area is going to be flush. If I just cut the front door off and then install the hinge, it's never going to line up just right here the way that it does before you cut it. So it's like one thing kind of leads to another. You know, then before you can cut the hinge, you might want it to go right up against the extrusion. So I had to cut a little piece of this to figure out exactly how high it needs to go when the tongue and groove goes on. Just things like that. This piece actually goes to the other side. So you can see it fits just like that. And then there will be the other piece that continues to the back. So it goes there. But yeah, just be aware of things like that. It's really important to plan more than just start building on this. Wow, I got crooked on that cut. I found that I spend more time figuring out the next step sometimes because I want to make sure that I don't move too quick. I don't want to make a cut and then realize, oh crap, it's going to be more difficult for me to line that up later or whatever. Now I know that anytime I take these hinges off, even after I cut the door separate from the case, see, I've only cut it, I've cut the sides and then down to here, but I haven't cut all the way across the front yet. And I also haven't cut the doors in half. So all that's still attached and I know that it's in place here. So anytime you take this hinge off and put it back on, you know it's going to go right back in place. It's just something to note. But there's lots of areas in building these road cases where you need to do that same kind of planning. You need to say, well, you might have to cut a little piece here so you can get that measurement more accurately, blah, blah, blah. There's just always a little bit of a rhyme and reason to it. Or I guess you could say a method to the madness, yeah. Now also I'm cutting the U sections for the latches to go in. And also with the handles, you want to try and be as precise here as possible because they don't really give you a lot of room. If you cut those handle holes too big, a lot of times you're going to realize when you go to put in a screw or a rivet, there's not enough wood there to really grab. So you want to make that hole as tight as you can where the handle is going to fit right in. Same with the latches. Try and make those U-shaped slots where the latch piece is going to fit in there about as tightly as it can with little to no movement. Now when you're building the main part of the road case, once you've got pretty much all the woodwork done, like the front doors cut open, maybe the hinges put on so at least they're in place, you don't even have to use all the screws. Those piano hinges take lots of screws. So maybe use 6 to 8 on each hinge, just enough to get those doors swinging. And then you can test fit that cradle really, really roughly just to make sure everything's going to fit and you're going to have room to, you know, build your structure and get it to flip up and down the way that it's eventually going to go. Okay, here's the little yellow sawing box I was talking about. You can clamp a piece of your aluminum in here and clamp it to the side. And then when you use the hacksaw, it gives you the perfect 45. You go through and cut it that way. Definitely worth getting that. And here is the tongue and groove. The tongue section is on top, so it goes all the way around. You know, you want to try and get these nice and tight here on the corners. So of course they're not riveted on or anything yet. Now if you're really good You can cut the extrusion before you break it apart because, like I mentioned before, this stuff is break apart. So you've got the tongue side here and then the groove side here, and then you break it right there on that middle line. But I'm better at actually breaking it apart and cutting the pieces that I need, because I mean, I know if you really think about it, I mean, you could cut that piece in one long one, then you could break it apart and then just cut the piece in half for the cabinets, because you know on the lid side the groove is going to stay all one piece, so you don't want to like cut the whole thing. So, you know, it's a little tricky. I mean, you'll end up messing up a few pieces if it's your first time, you know, trying to get all this little stuff right, these little angles and stuff. It can be a pain, but once you get this part done, I feel like a lot of the other stuff isn't too bad. This is probably one of the most tedious to get right if it's your first time. So, you know, take your time measuring with it. Still got to do the one for the lid, but I have already cut a few pieces. I'm just waiting until I cut out the notches for the latches first, and then I'll build the aluminum for the lid. So we're getting some metal fitted up now, and one thing that you gotta remember when messing with a road case is certain things are not gonna line up as easily as, you know, just doing some kind of woodwork. I mean, for one thing, you gotta look at where the edge of this metal edging, or the tongue and groove, where is it actually gonna end up after it's on the wood. So when you cut this section out, you don't have a lot of room for error with these holes. Like if you cut too far, you're gonna end up having to build the edge with resin and sawdust or something, because you gotta get it, you wanna get this thing to where it's gonna sit nice and tight in there, and you can't, you know, push it down. You want it to be cut just right. So what I had to do here was measure how far down the distance is from here to there. And then you need to basically subtract it from however much this is, you know, let's see, however different that it is. See, if you were to cut it where this part fit in the wood like that, I mean, I've built cases like that before when I'm not using this stuff, just to kind of build like a quick case for myself. But when you're trying to do something nice and make it like a legitimate road case, and you're using, you know, tongue and groove, you got to make sure that you measure for that, because it's actually going to sit a little higher than if it were just going into the wood. So make sure that you take the time to measure and fit things like that before you make a lot of cuts. And see, it's going to fit really nicely in there. Also, another thing that I'm doing, you'll notice, is I'm putting the small part of this latch almost as if they're going to be upside down from the lid, because when you lift the lid off, I want the big latches to go with it. I want these doors to have the small section in there, since they're going to be kind of opening and you're going to have the mixer board and stuff like that there. Also, I don't like having the latches kind of like hanging open, so you know, the little butterfly part comes and swings down, so it's better to put that on the lid for this particular case. Man, I'll tell you, fitting the metal onto the road case is not an easy task. You always want to make sure that you cut a little bit longer than shorter, and really spend some time getting those edges to line up just right, because when you get ready to put the 6-hole clamps on, or like the clamps that I'm using are 6-hole, you want those edges to be as square as possible, and you don't want one end sticking out further than the other, because then you're going to have problems the way that clamp goes on, especially when you pull those rivets. It's going to just try and bend everything into place, and it's not going to be pretty. Okay, so when I'm measuring to cut a piece of this that's gonna go at a 45, now these are the easy pieces because everything just kind of stays straight. But what I do is I line up the edge as good as I can get it right there. And then what you wanna do is make your line
somewhere around a 1/16 of an inch. Here, it's hard to like hold this. Somewhere around a 1/16 of an inch from the edge. You want it to overlap just a little bit because the corners need to come together nice and tight. Let me show you how to do that over here. This one isn't the best one. I don't know what happened to me right there. I mean, either way, the clamp is gonna cover that part anyway. But sometimes, you know, you can get them pretty nice. Like, that one's not bad. It'll close up pretty tight. Okay. Also, this one over here is pretty good. I feel like it's okay. So, yeah, anyway. You want it to be as tight as you can get it. It's tricky. But I think a 1/16 of an inch is pretty close. So I figured I would show that.
All right, so the tongue and groove pieces are cut for the lid. Pretty nice tight corners. I'm pretty happy with it. And as you can see, I had to compensate for how much of this was gonna hang over when I cut my latch, you know, drop in areas or C cuts, whatever you wanna call them. So you want this to hit just right at the bottom when it lines up at the top. But you can see it stops, and that's exactly where you want it because you just don't have a lot of room for error with these holes. If that bottom part was too big, you don't even have to move it much. Look, you wouldn't hit wood. So it's very important to measure accurately when you're installing these things or when you're making your cutouts. Now we'll get to the corner edging. Figured I'd take a little video around it. So here's the case. Got pretty much all the metal cut and fitted on. It's just kind of test fitted. And you know, all that comes back off so I can put the black laminate on it and make it look like a real road case. And then there's the lid. Pretty much all the trim is cut and fitted for that. Let's see. So you end up getting corners that go on. And then that edge up there has a nice little clamp that seals it off. So that ends up going there. And making some progress. I think cutting the metal is probably one of the most time-consuming things. So I did most of that today. I already had a little bit of it done, but pretty much all the trim. The bottom rails are actually sitting in there. They're already cut. They just go on the outside. And then here's the mixer. And this will be pretty much ready to paint. Do a little sanding on it, but yeah, coming along. That's my case under it. You see how mine are never finished. Maybe one day. But yeah. So now I'm getting the part built that holds the actual mixer cradle that you see over there that flips up. So I installed a 2x4 across the top. I've got one right here, and this is gonna do a few things. It's gonna act as a brace, you know, vertically, and then also when the mixer is flipped down into the storage position, it's gonna stop against here. So you're not just like, you know, right here it'd be trying to like rip the hinges off. But you want a nice little, there's gonna be like a little bump stop so that when it comes down, it kind of sits at a nice place. So we're gonna install this board in right now. And the hinges, as you can see, They just screw right here to the top. I've already test fitted it. So 3 hinges go across, and that's how the actual mixer part flips up. Man, I'm gonna tell you guys, the first time you get that cradle mounted in there, with it flipping up and down, the doors open and closing, you're kind of seeing it work, especially when you stick the console in there just for a nice little test fit. It's super rewarding, and it really gives you a good perspective and motivation on how this thing's gonna come out as a finished product. We just got the mixer cradle part mounted in, and it's just real simple right now. I've got a few hinges kind of holding it back there. Probably gonna put longer screws that take up most of this depth so that that's really strong, and then I'll put longer screws in there. They're just kind of for makeup right now. So I like the way that this one is flipping so far. It feels like it's gonna work really well. Open the doors, and here, let's zoom out. So we open the doors, and then it's gonna flip like this. Then you'll shut the doors under it, and it'll hold up. Let's see. I didn't shut them all the way, but basically you'll see that's how it works. And one thing to keep in mind when you're doing road cases, you don't want to have to put screws through the outside. So anything you have to build on the inside, like braces and things like that, you need to do all this first. Don't do any black laminate until the case is built. You know, you're gonna have to put things together, take it back apart to do the laminate, but don't do it until everything is built, because if you end up having to put a screw through the laminate, it's not gonna look as nice. So you definitely don't wanna do that. So make sure you get all the stuff that you're gonna install done first, and then come back in the end and put on that black laminate. So yeah, it's coming along good. Hoping to see the light at the end of the tunnel on this one pretty soon. Something I gotta say about the metalwork. I felt like it took forever on this case, and this isn't really a simple road case either. I mean, it's definitely not the most complicated thing out there, but sometimes you could build a road case with just a lid that comes off, or a lid with some hinges. But when you're installing a removable lid, some cabinet style doors, a cradle for a mixing console that flips up and down and it needs to be safe, there's a lot of little things that kind of go on. A lot of factors that have to go into making sure that you're going to design it correctly. The process of getting all this edge and these latches put on can be a little tricky. What you want to do is, I started with the bottom, and then I did the bottom of the doors, and then you want to cut that angle piece that's going to go here to your latch. Now what you want to do is put in a screw for temporary reasons so you can fit the latch up and get it about where you want it. Then drill the holes to get the next piece on. Don't worry about all these just yet. I kind of do those last. But what I'm going to do next is drill the hole for this top latch. And what I want to try and do is get everything fitted together where these doors are going to close the way I was talking about, where they're nice and straight on top. And that's going to have a lot to do with how the latches are mounted. So I'm just kind of following the lines around. I'm not like putting on these pieces, then putting on those pieces. I'm going to follow my way up, and then I'm going to probably come down here and put this latch, the receiving part or whatever you call it. I'm going to put that part on and follow my way up as well, and make sure that as I go, when I latch it together, it ends up right where I want it up here. So when the lid goes on, you've got a nice straight, tongue and groove line up. So just to go over fitting up the metal edging on the front. Now I didn't feel that it was necessary to put the tongue and groove all the way down this whole cabinet thing. And of course down here it would have gotten really difficult to try and get it to close right, so you don't really do that. I use the metal edging though, it's aluminum, and it's just gonna make it look really nice whenever it closes. And just kind of seal off the edges so they don't get beat up and whatnot. Now what you gotta do is you have to come back and saw a little bit out. There's gonna be the angle edging just like this that goes all the way up, so you don't see this part. But over here on the side there might be a small bit where you can see the black laminate, and I wanted that gap to stay as tight as possible. So, it's not going to be a huge deal if you see a little bit of just the edge of the wood here on the sides. You're still going to have that edging going up, so there's not really going to be much exposed at all. The other thing is, this part right here, getting it to line up right. Now you saw a little bit of extra wood out, and then up here on top, what you want to happen is when you latch the cabinet door shut, so when you put these latches on and you get those latched together, you want this metal edge up here to line up just right. So you can tell when I put these latches on, I'm gonna have to put them on to where they barely raise this right side. As you can see, it wants to set a little low, which is not a huge deal. I mean, you're talking less than like a 1/16 of an inch, but I want it to be exactly right so that when you put the lid on, this whole edge fits the lid really nice all the way around. So that's where we're at. We're kind of getting this thing fitted up correctly, getting some things put on so I can finish the woodwork and start on the black laminate. So there we go. That's kind of how she sits right now. In this case, I decided to cut all the metal and kind of have it ready and pre-fit it on so that once I laminated the case parts, it would be easy for me to just go back and install all my metalwork. Now, one of the most important things I can't stress enough when you're building a road case is the glue that you use to put your laminate on needs to be some high strength stuff. If you're using a spray adhesive, you need to make sure that it's rated for really high heat. The highest heat stuff you can get. If it's cheap, it's probably not going to be any good. In this case, I actually used the Weldwood contact cement, and this stuff I always felt like was going to be way too strong to use on a road case. But sometimes it gets so hot, if the sun's beating down on it, you really want some kind of high strength adhesive that's going to keep this stuff from lifting off. And I'll tell you, when it starts to lift and you realize you got to drill out all these rivets and pull off all this metal hardware just to fix it correctly, you're going to be pretty upset. It happened to me. In some cases, if you have access to it, you could buy a sheet of the proper plywood that's already pre-laminated with the black ABS laminate glued to it. I didn't have access to that as far as I know, so I ordered a 4x8 sheet of ABS laminate to go on the sheet of plywood, but I felt like I would cut it into pieces and glue it on as I go. Now I have seen people who have a few helping hands. You can glue the whole sheet of plywood and the ABS sheet all together at once. That way whenever you make your cuts, it's already laminated. It's a pretty smart way to do it too, but you have options here.
It would be wise to do some research on some laminate glues as well. Typically some type of high heat spray adhesive works, but you have to make sure you use enough of it. The Weldwood contact cement is also a good option from what I've seen. And make sure that you go over it with a J roller really hard to get that adhesive to stick.
So what I'm doing here is kind of starting the final assembly of the lid. And basically with rivets, you just drill the holes. I'm sure you've probably used rivets before. If not, you're gonna drill a hole, you stick it in there, and a lot of times people will get a lot of holes going at a time. I'm gonna set everything on with a couple rivets before I go super permanent, because I wanna make sure that when I put the lid on the case, it fits up real nice before I make everything solid. But for now, I'm just putting in a few. I'm gonna probably put that one in. Let me just go ahead and drill I'll get one in here too. Also, I love the pre-punched angle. You don't have to drill through that. It saves you a lot of time and headache. Now you're probably gonna have to pull this rivet before you can put the other one in, because it's kind of blocking the hole. And I use an air-powered rivet gun. This is one from Harbor Freight. I don't know if it was, I think it was the more expensive one. I wanted it to work really well, and I think it was the one that was a little higher, but I'm not sure. So let's put it on the little pin. You saw how I did that. Make sure it's all the way down. And it pulls it and breaks the little pin out. And you tilt it back, get that little piece that broke, and there's your rivet. Let's throw in another one. I love these. Now, if they are a little bit in the way, I'm just gonna have to regroup on that. Let's see if it goes in. Yeah, it pretty much goes in. Sometimes you gotta pull it twice for the bigger rivets. Cool. And they look very pretty. There we go. We're gonna get one of these pieces on, then a corner goes on, and once I get the other side here, you get one of the clamps. Covers up the edges there real nice. I have to see why that's not setting. Oh, I know why it is. Anyway. We're just about done getting the metal on the lid. Now when you do this, you're probably gonna come up with your own process. You're gonna wanna find ways that you can center the holes to get them where you want them, and at least where they look somewhat uniform. I don't think they'll ever be perfect. What I did was the black laminate, and then I went to one side and kind of installed this tongue and groove, or the groove part of the tongue and groove, so I could see where the latches were gonna line up and try to get that to go, and then I worked my way around. So one piece ended up somewhere, another piece there, you put the clamp on. You can just kind of come up with your own process, whatever you think is good. If you want, you could start with these top rails and get those on first. But when it all comes down to it, it's gonna take some practice getting these clamps to go on nice. You know, in some places, it tries to spread the gap a little bit because these clamps are steel and they're so straight, they wanna pull the aluminum to that perfect 90-degree angle. So you can see this one is gonna end up pulling when I put that other rivet in, but it won't have that bad of a gap. I mean, So little things like that, you're just gonna have to work with it and take your time. So this is what I use for coating the inside. Sometimes I do road cases with the outside. I mean, I'll coat the outside, but usually on my own. And this is what it looks like. You know, it's a good, durable black coating. I mean, it's thick, it builds up pretty nice. The thing about it is the laminate looks a lot nicer on the outside of a road case, so I only really do that to my road cases on the outside. When I'm doing it for someone else, I'll use the laminate. Unless they just say, hey, I need a really cheap case, just do whatever, you know, paint it, they don't mind. But on this one, we're using laminate. Now on the inside, it's gonna be fine because we're gonna throw some cables in the bottom, maybe store some things. The padding for the mixer is gonna all be in that flip cradle part, the part that moves. So the interior of this case is just gonna be kind of rugged. They're probably gonna, you know, throw maybe some extra microphones or something in there, you never know. But as far as a concrete floor coating, I've never really tried it, but I could just kind of tell, I feel like I would want something a little bit more durable if I was using it on a garage floor. But when it comes to a wood coating, this stuff has been awesome. I mean, I've even used it on ramps and things like that. So I like the way that it adheres to wood, and it's been, you know, a good durable thing for me. So that's what I'll use on the interior of this one. All right, so the hole for the handle's already cut on the inside, but cutting through the ABS, it can be a little tricky because you don't want to push on it too much. I don't want to like lift the glue, especially when it's kind of fresh. So I take a rotary tool and I go around the inside like this. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work my way all the way around it that way, and then I can use a razor blade to finish it off and get the square out. Once you get it out, I'm gonna come over to the other one. Now, I don't use washers with the rivets for the whole case because I feel like it would almost be unnecessary when you've got the metal edging and you've got tons of rivets that are gonna be holding it in. But for the handles, I definitely do. So I put rivets, I'm gonna put them all the way around for the handles. It gives you a little extra strength because the rivet would basically have to pull that whole chunk of wood out to actually come loose. And you can tell just with those two rivets, this handle isn't going anywhere. I mean, especially if they were mounted down there, but even here, you know, they're in there. So that's the way that's going. So yeah, now down here, I needed the edge to be really nice because there's going to be a little bit of area where you actually see the edge of the ABS and the wood. It's not much because I've got some aluminum that's going to be down here, and then I've also got the edge angle that goes on here. So for the most part, a lot of this is going to be disguised, especially when it's closed, but when the door is closed, I think there's going to be a small bit of seam that you see here. It's not gonna be a big deal. The hinge comes to about there, so I mean, it shouldn't be too bad. But that's how it's coming out. You're good so far. And keep it going. So again, we're putting on the rest of the handle rivets, and you wanna make sure that you install a washer because you want those rivets to be pulling against a little bit more of the wood on the inside rather than just what you would, you know. I think it's okay just using the rivet on a lot of these other parts, but the washers give it extra strength for the handle. So something that I do. I'm using these number 8 washers for the 3/16 rivets. Well, I think I'm pretty dang happy with how this thing's coming out. Road cases are so pretty when they're brand new. I mean, the black and silver everywhere. I'm loving it. See inside, see the structure that holds the mixer. It ends up, there's a hinge that bolts to the top. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way it's coming out so far. Pretty cool. Now, one thing I need to point out is how important it is to be really precise with your measuring and fitting when it comes to the metal on the case. Of course, I had the metal edging on earlier. I pre-drilled some of these holes because you can see when it comes to your latches, there's not a lot of room for error. And I mean, it's a 3/16 hole, so it needs to be cleaned out a little bit. But you can see where if you cut, I mean, even an 1/8 inch too much out where these latches go, you're not gonna have very much wood to grab. And especially these days with plywood being made so cheap, it just breaks apart in some places. So you wanna make sure you're really precise with your measuring and, you know, fitting when you're getting your metal fitted on and trying to pre-drill. So something to note. Now, since the screws for the piano hinges are really small, I don't want to pilot drill into the wood. All I want to do is get this countersinking bit right here, and I want to push just enough in to where it gets rid of some of the ABS plastic. So you'll see we're gonna center, you gotta make sure you center the bit. I mean, you could pilot hole a really tiny hole if you want, but I don't. I just make sure I center it, and then right until it sinks. Usually gotta push back on it a bit. Okay, so now you can kind of see it went in. You're gonna have a little bit of that ABS on the bit, and you just want to make like, basically you can see the wood, you're just getting rid of some of that plastic so it's not like forcing it out of the way and curling it up. Got the laminate put on the doors now, so that's cool. We're getting those put back on and trimming out the little areas for the latches to go, and just, you know, one thing at a time. It's looking good though, pretty happy with it. Now I know it's a bit hard to tell, but if you can see this line right here, that was the part earlier in the video where I told you I was building the box as a whole, but before I actually nail and glue all the sides together, you want to route this channel, and that's what I was doing. So basically what happened was, when the lid was connected still, it was all one piece of wood before, I had this piece of wood laying down, and what I basically did was routed this channel wide enough to where it went from here into the lid as well. And then I also left enough for the saw blade because I knew I was going to cut these apart. So you want to take that 1/8 inch or so for the saw blade and make sure that you've got enough. And then that way when your tongue and groove piece goes on, it's going to have enough to slide all the way down just like that. And you can see over here from the side, that's a pretty good fit. Now, you could buy a sheet of plywood that ends up being just right, but what you got to account for, oh, we got a nasty little chip missing there, but it's okay, I'll glue a piece in. What you have to account for is the fact that you're going to put this stuff on over the ABS laminate. Now, you can tell this is a pretty nice fit, the way that that lined up. The ABS makes it a little thicker, and then that's why we routed back here, because I knew that the overall thickness was going to end up a little too wide for this tongue and groove piece. If I had left the plywood its original thickness, it would have been really tough to get that to go on. So that's just a little close-up explanation of why I was routing that little channel in all 4 of the side pieces before we built the box together. Alright, so the point we're at now is I got a strap put around it and the lid's sitting back on. And I feel like what that's probably doing is making sure all this stuff kind of stays where I put it. I don't know why there's a bit of a gap here. Maybe I'll figure it out. Oh, okay. Can probably push that up and adjust it a little bit. Yeah, okay. So I can fine adjust that before I put rivets in. But it's gonna keep everything kind of straight. I haven't done the clamps back here yet, the latches. But I strap it together because I kind of placed these where I wanted them, and I wanted them to stay there. So that's what we're doing. I'm still building everything out with about half the rivets because I want to get it all put together and make sure everything functions right. Let's zoom out. So I want to make sure everything's functioning properly, and once we make sure of that, I'll go back and put in all the rivets to really finish it off and call it done. So installing the caster wheels wasn't too bad. I'm using these. They are 5/16 by 3/8 by 7/8 T-nuts. And it's the size of bolt that fits perfectly through the caster wheel. So basically it's this size. When you buy casters, if you buy them at your home improvement store or whatever, try to get bolts that fit at the same time. So there's the bolts and then the T-nuts. And these are cool because you just drill the hole, you press it in a little bit, and then whenever you tighten it on the inside, it pulls it into the wood. So that's what we're using for the caster wheels. And I've just about got them done. It is a little tricky placement wise because you don't want to put the casters too far in. It's more likely for the case to tip over. But this is as far out as I could get them where the T-nuts would still fit inside the wall. If you try to put the caster all the way out here to the edge, it's just, the only way to really do that is if you were to get threaded inserts, which I did build the floor thick enough for that. But I wanted to have the T-nuts grabbing from the inside, so I figured I sacrifice another, 1/2 inch or so, the wheel going that way. It's not going to make a huge difference. But the benefit of having the T-nuts on the inside was so much better for me. So that's the way I did that. Let's get this one tightened up the rest of the way. I think these are just about good. Now I'm using a locking washer on the bolt side, so the bolt locks and is less likely to spin backwards. As far as going on to this edging, the wheel is halfway on the silver, and then I'm using washers that are about the thickness of that metal to space it. If you tighten these bolts up too tight, it's going to pull the caster, so you're going to have to end up using a second washer, because that washer will sink into the wood a little bit if you're not careful. So that's that. Alright, so the point we're at now is I got a strap put around it and the lid's sitting back on. And I feel like what that's probably doing is making sure all this stuff kind of stays where I put it. I don't know why there's a bit of a gap here. Maybe I'll figure it out. Oh, okay. I can probably push that up and adjust it a little bit. Yeah, okay. So I can fine adjust that before I put rivets in. But it's gonna keep everything kind of straight. I haven't done the clamps back here yet, and the latches. But I strap it together because I kind of placed these where I wanted them. I wanted them to stay there. So that's what we're doing. I'm still building everything out with about half the rivets because I want to get it all put together and make sure everything functions right. Let's zoom out. So I want to make sure everything's functioning properly. And once we make sure of that, I'll go back and put in all the rivets to really finish it off and call it done. So now that our main case is pretty much seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, it's time to put a nice little paint finish on our console cradle and get that thing ready to be installed and set up all the little bells and whistles that go along with it. If you didn't already know, I'm a pretty big fan of Sherwin-Williams automotive paint lines, mainly the Ultra line. I actually don't buy any of the low quality clear coat at all. Anything that costs $100, $120, $150 for a gallon with the hardener, it's not good stuff. It's cheap. I typically spend somewhere around $500 for a gallon of clear, maybe $600 with the hardener. And that's how you know you're getting premium quality stuff. Now, in this case, it's going in the mixing console. It's rarely ever going to see sun exposure. But let's go to the case of painting a classic car. You know, you're going to put countless hours into the prep work on that. And I have no idea why anybody would put the cheapest clear coat you could buy over that paint job. And they think it's the same thing. Sure, the appearance is exactly the same. I mean, I could take a $150 gallon of clear coat, make it just as shiny as a $600 gallon of clear coat. But it's not going to last longer than 2 years in the sun versus some really high dollar Sherwin-Williams or PPG clear coat that's going to last you 10, 15, maybe even 20 years without even thinking about it. So, rant over, but I have a big pet peeve of people using cheap clear coat on a paint job that they've spent tons of time preparing.
Now, one thing to note here is if you're planning to put an automotive clear coat over a spray can color, it's always a wise idea to use a can of that spray clear as well and let it dry so that you can lightly scuff it before you put on the automotive paint. Otherwise, you might have adhesion issues.
Once that cradle was painted, all I really had left to do was install some padding that I had already measured for and compensated for. So it's ready to slip in there, and then we're going to get it all put back together for final assembly and get this thing ready to deliver to School of Rock.
So this is kind of a fun part. I'm fitting the mixer into the case. I'm figuring out exactly how much padding I can use. I'm going to do the sides really good. There's going to be a pad that goes up under here, so it kind of holds down, and then a little bit that goes up under here too. And did kind of a quick, nice little paint job on that, just to give it the red, make it kind of stand out a little bit. So yeah, there it goes. That's the part that pivots up. What we're doing now is going through and drilling all the leftover holes and installing the rivets. So you'll notice you'll fly through boxes of rivets on this step. I think there's 50 in these boxes. You probably overall on a whole case, if you're doing a case of this size with all these kind of latches and everything, this has a lot of hardware on it, so there were a lot of rivets used. I think I'm going to be going through about 7 or 8 boxes of these, and at $6 a box or so, figure that into your estimate. So we're finishing it up. It's looking good. Here we are putting together the finishing touches now. We're putting in these bolts to keep the mixer nice and tight in there. I also used some padding underneath all these pieces. There's like kind of the same rubbery foam that you'd use for a window seal. There's a little bit up under here as well. And as you know, this piece has the curved angle in there. And these bolts are gonna hold everything nice and tight together. So the finished product's coming out nice. Got our metallic red on there, and should be ready to use. I think that's about it for this build. I feel like it came out pretty good. The new mixer's installed. And I'm gonna do one final check to make sure everything is tidied up, and I think she's ready for delivery.
good.
Yay, look at that. A great reveal.
All right, here it comes. You ready?
Definitely a lot of TLC went into this.
Oh look, it even says School of Rock on the front.
Yeah, so it's labeled on the front, the sides, and the back. But there is padding in there so it doesn't beat the...
Look at that. Whoa.
All 4 latches on the front. So that's going to open. And then it... doors. And you'll want to latch at least a couple of them. Maybe like the top.
Yeah, make sure it says.
Should be
That's
ready
it.
to use.
Awesome.
So that's kind of how she works. Cool. When it goes down, you'll notice it just kind of transfers the weight.
You did a wonderful job. Even put some nice finishing touches on it. Very appreciative of it. Thank you, Mike.
This is awesome.
Yeah, it'll be
Thank you, Mike. Sweet.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Excellent. Thanks.
Okay, so we got the great case here today for the Allen and Heath QU32. Mike did a wonderful job. It's going to definitely be durable for us and our gigs.
Well, as always, I hope you guys learned a thing or two. If you have any questions, always feel free to hit me up in the comments. Stick around. There's going to be a piano restoration DIY coming up. It's going to be my beloved Yamaha 6.5 foot grand piano that I got for a really good deal and felt like it was totally worth taking this thing apart and doing a nice little cosmetic wood finish job too. So make sure you check back, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed, and we'll see you on the next one.
Who we call Magic Mike for other reasons than you may think.
Hi,
you wanna do?
my name is Dave.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even hit record. No,
I
I'm just
know
kidding.
you did not.
No, I'm
I
just
was
kidding.
like, oh my god.
Wait, are you shooting this?
Okay. Which is why we called up.
And you got one.
Beautiful. Candy apple red for the ladies.